Boston's criminal underworld held its collective breath when its most ruthless boss let his dying grandfather pick his bride. Everyone anticipated a pristine, polished Mafia princess. Nobody expected a fat, exhausted, debt-ridden nurse wearing a stained uniform, a woman who had zero clue who she was even dealing with. Massachusetts General Hospital usually reserved its VIP wing for tech billionaires and reclusive politicians. For 3 months, however, heavily armed guards from the Costanza family had silently commandeered the entire top floor. Outside room 412, 2 men in tailored Brioni suits stood like gargoyles, their eyes tracking every doctor and orderly who dared to step off the elevator. Inside the room, propped up by a mountain of sterile white pillows, lay Carmine Costanza, the former don of the New England syndicates. Carmine's lungs were failing. His heart was a ticking time bomb, and his grip on reality occasionally slipped, but his grip on his family's multi-billion-dollar empire remained absolute. Sitting rigidly in a leather chair beside the bed was his grandson, Vincent Costanza. Vincent was 32, carved from cold marble, and widely regarded as the most terrifying man in Boston. He had taken over the family's daily operations 5 years ago, transforming a brutal street-level mafia into a sophisticated corporate juggernaut that moved weapons and narcotics with terrifying efficiency. But there was a catch. The clean billions, the legitimate real estate holdings, the shell companies in the Cayman Islands, the vast trust funds that kept the federal government at bay were entirely locked in a generations-old family trust. According to the ironclad legal stipulations drafted by Carmine decades ago, Vincent could not inherit the role of sole trustee until he was legally married. "I'm running out of time, Vincenzo," Carmine rasped, his voice a wet rattle. "The feds are sniffing around the docks. The Russians are testing our borders. You need the trust unlocked to fortify the legitimate businesses. You need a wife." "I have a dozen portfolios on my desk," Vincent replied smoothly, checking his Rolex. "The Greco family has a daughter, Oxford-educated, speaks 4 languages. The Moretti family offered their youngest. I will pick one by Friday, sign the papers, and the trust will transfer." "No," Carmine coughed, holding up a trembling, liver-spotted hand. "I've seen those girls, vipers in designer dresses. They will smile at your dinners and poison your wine the moment their fathers tell them to. I built this empire. I get to choose who sits on the throne beside you." Vincent's jaw tightened. "Grandpa, this is business. It is a strategic alliance. You cannot seriously want to meddle in this." "I am the Don," Carmine snapped, a flash of his old, terrifying authority bleeding through the frailty. "And my final decree is this. I pick the bride, or the entire trust goes to the Catholic Church upon my death. Try running your empire when the Vatican owns your shipping yards." Vincent went perfectly still. He knew his grandfather wasn't bluffing. "Fine," Vincent said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Who is she? Which family?" Before Carmine could answer, the heavy wooden door to the hospital room swung open. The 2 bodyguards outside tried to step in, but the person entering simply squeezed past them with a heavy sigh, carrying a plastic tray loaded with medical supplies. It was Abigail Higgins. Abigail was a registered nurse who had been working back-to-back double shifts for a month. She was 27, chronically sleep-deprived, and unapologetically fat. She carried her weight with a sort of exhausted resilience, wide hips, straining the fabric of her navy blue scrubs, thick thighs chafing as she walked, and a soft, full belly that she frequently rested a clipboard against. Her dark hair was shoved into a messy bun, held together by a plastic claw clip, and her face was flushed and damp with sweat from wrestling a combative patient 2 rooms down. She did not look like a Mafia queen. She looked like a woman who survived on break-room coffee and discounted donuts. "All right, Mr. Costanza," Abigail said, completely ignoring the terrifying, immaculately dressed billionaire glaring at her from the corner. "Time to check that blood pressure, and then I'm sneaking you that cherry jello you shouldn't have. Don't tell Dr. Miller." Carmine's stern, weathered face instantly broke into a warm, genuine smile. "Abby, my favorite girl." Vincent stared in disbelief as this large, clumsy woman waddled up to the bed, wrapped a blood pressure cuff around the most feared man in Boston's arm, and gently patted his hand. "Your grandson visiting again?" Abigail asked casually, glancing at Vincent. She didn't know who the Costanzas really were. To her, they were just another wealthy family who threw their money around the hospital. She found Vincent wildly handsome in a terrifying, predatory way, but she had precisely 0 patience for arrogant rich men. "Make sure he doesn't stress you out. Your vitals were all over the place yesterday." Vincent stood up, towering over her. "Excuse me." "You're excused," Abigail said smoothly, pumping the little rubber bulb. "Quiet, please. I need to listen." Vincent looked like he was about to draw a weapon, but Carmine let out a raspy chuckle. "Vincenzo," Carmine said, pointing a trembling finger at the nurse, who was currently squinting at a pressure gauge. "Meet your new wife." The cuff hissed loudly as it deflated. Abigail froze. She looked at Carmine, then at Vincent, and let out a tired, bewildered laugh. "Mr. Costanza, the morphine pump is set to a strictly controlled drip. Are you hallucinating again?" "I am dead serious," Carmine said, his eyes locking onto his grandson. "Her, the nurse, Abigail, she is the one you will marry, or you get nothing." Vincent's expression was murderous. He looked Abigail up and down, his eyes lingering on her stained scrubs, her scuffed orthopedic Crocs, and the heavy, undeniable bulk of her frame. It wasn't just that she wasn't Mafia royalty. She was the antithesis of everything his world valued in a woman. There was no polish, no pedigree, no delicate, fragile beauty. "You have gone insane," Vincent sneered, turning his back on Abigail as if she were a piece of defective furniture. "I am not marrying a blue-collar elephant. This is a sick joke." Abigail's face burned hot red, the insult striking her like a physical blow. She had been mocked for her size her entire life, but the pure, venomous disgust in Vincent's voice was suffocating. "Hey," Abigail snapped, slamming the clipboard onto the tray. "I don't know what kind of weird, twisted billionaire game you two are playing, but I am not a prop. And you," she pointed a plump finger squarely at Vincent's chest, "are an absolute jerk. Get out of my way." She shoved past the most dangerous man on the East Coast, her heavy shoulder knocking into his chest hard enough to make him take a half-step back, and marched out of the room. Carmine laughed until he dissolved into a violent coughing fit. When he finally caught his breath, he looked at his furious grandson. "See? She didn't flinch. You put a gun to those mob daughters, they cry. She just knocked the Don of New England out of her way. That is the woman who will protect your soul, Vincenzo. Marry her. That is my final word." 30 minutes later, Abigail was hiding in the third-floor staff break room, desperately trying to eat a stale vending machine sandwich before her next rounds. Her hands were still shaking. The insult hurled at her by Vincent burned in her chest, but she didn't have the luxury of crying. She pulled out her phone and stared at the digital banking app. Balance: £450. Then she looked at the pending invoice from Sunrise Senior Living out on Route 9. Her mother's early-onset Alzheimer's required specialized round-the-clock care that cost $8,000 a month. Abigail had maxed out every credit card, taken out predatory loans, and worked 90-hour weeks. But the facility had informed her that morning, if the arrears weren't cleared by Friday, her mother would be evicted. The door to the break room clicked locked. Abigail looked up, her heart jumping into her throat. Vincent Costanza stood blocking the exit. He reached up, casually pulling the blinds down over the glass window so nobody in the hallway could see inside. "You can't be in here," Abigail said, trying to keep her voice steady. She stood up, her thighs brushing against the small break room table. "This is staff only." Vincent didn't move. He simply stared at her, his dark eyes analyzing her like a complex, slightly disgusting puzzle. "My grandfather is a stubborn, dying man. He holds the keys to assets that I require to secure my family's future. He has decided, in his drug-addled state, that you are the price of admission." "I heard him," Abigail said, crossing her heavy arms over her chest defensively. "And I already told you, I'm not interested in whatever sick game you're playing. Go buy yourself a mail-order bride." "I am not playing a game, Miss Higgins," Vincent said, stepping closer. The smell of his cologne, something impossibly expensive, cedar and smoke, filled the cramped room. "I run a very large, very aggressive organization. I do not have time for romance. I do not have time for sentiment. I need a legal marriage certificate. So here is what is going to happen." He pulled a folded piece of heavy stock paper from his suit pocket and tossed it onto the table in front of her. "We will be married on paper. We will live in the same house to satisfy my grandfather's paranoid spies. You will attend public functions on my arm. You will not ask questions about my business, my associates, or my hours. In exchange, I will deposit $2 million into your bank account tomorrow morning, and I will pay you an additional $50,000 a month for the duration of the arrangement." Abigail stared at the piece of paper. The numbers he was casually throwing around were astronomical. It was salvation. It was her mother's safety, guaranteed for the rest of her life. $2 million, she whispered, the fight draining out of her. "Tax-free," Vincent added coldly. "When my grandfather inevitably passes, we will file for a quiet divorce. You keep the money. You disappear. We never speak again." Abigail looked up into his cold, calculating eyes. "Why are you really doing this? You called me an elephant. You hate looking at me." "I do not hate looking at you," Vincent corrected, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. "I simply feel nothing when I look at you, which, frankly, makes this business transaction much easier. I do not want a real wife. I do not want complications. You are a means to an end." She swallowed hard. Her pride was screaming at her to throw the paper in his face. But the memory of her mother, confused and terrified in a strange room, silenced her pride. "Fine," Abigail said, her voice shaking slightly. "I'll do it, but I have conditions. I keep my job here, and you never, ever insult my weight again." Vincent's gaze dropped to her stomach, then back to her eyes. "Agreed." Pack your things. A car is waiting downstairs to take you to my tailor. If you are going to stand next to me, you will not do it wearing rubber shoes." 3 days later, Abigail found herself standing on a velvet pedestal in a violently expensive private bridal boutique on Newbury Street. The walls were lined with delicate silk, French lace, and champagne flutes. She felt like a whale in a fishbowl. 2 terrifyingly thin seamstresses were buzzing around her, armed with measuring tape, muttering in rapid French. They were struggling. Couture, it seemed, was not designed for a woman who wore a size 22. Vincent sat on a leather sofa across the room, aggressively scrolling through his phone, flanked by his intimidating underboss, Leo Greco. Leo was massive, scarred, and completely silent, watching the street outside through the boutique's front window. The door chimed, and a woman walked in. It was Vanessa Montgomery, daughter of the city's largest illicit gambling kingpin. She was tall, lithe, and dripping in diamonds. She was also the woman everyone in the underworld had assumed Vincent would marry. Vanessa froze when she saw Vincent, a predatory smile instantly forming on her lips. "Vincent, darling, I heard the absurd rumors, but I didn't believe them. Tell me you aren't actually humoring the old man." She turned her gaze to the pedestal, looking at Abigail, who was currently pinned into an ill-fitting, partially constructed bodice that dug painfully into her back fat. Vanessa's smile turned into a sneer of pure, unfiltered revulsion. "Oh my God," Vanessa laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. "Is this it? This is the charity case Don Carmine dragged out of the gutter? Tell me, do they even make silk in a size, what is that, a circus tent?" Abigail flinched, looking down at her bare arms, suddenly hyper-aware of every dimple, every stretch mark, every inch of excess flesh on her body. The seamstresses backed away, sensing the sudden tension. Abigail's eyes burned with humiliated tears, and she moved to step off the pedestal to run to the dressing room. "Stop moving," a voice cracked through the room like a whip. Vincent stood up. The air in the boutique instantly dropped 10 degrees. He pocketed his phone and walked slowly toward Vanessa. He didn't look angry. He looked lethal. "Vincent," Vanessa cooed, misreading the situation entirely. "I'm just saying, it's humiliating for you. Let me talk to my father. We can bypass Carmine's trust." "Leo," Vincent interrupted quietly, not taking his eyes off Vanessa. Leo Greco immediately stepped forward and locked the boutique's front door, flipping the "closed" sign. Vanessa's smile faltered. "Vincent, what are you doing?" "You are standing in the presence of my fiancée," Vincent said, his voice dangerously soft. He stopped inches from Vanessa, his physical presence overwhelming her. "She is a Costanza now. That means she is my property, my blood, and my reputation. When you insult her, you insult me." I didn't mean it like that," Vanessa stammered, genuinely terrified now as she saw the dead, shark-like emptiness in Vincent's eyes. "Your father moves his slot machines through my ports," Vincent whispered, leaning in so close Vanessa shrank back. "If you ever speak to my future wife again, if you ever even look at her in a way I don't like, I will see every shipment your family has, burn your casinos to the ground, and hang your father from the Tobin Bridge. Do we understand each other?" Vanessa was trembling visibly. Yes, Vincent." "Apologize to her," he commanded. Vanessa turned slowly to Abigail, who was watching the scene in shocked silence. I apologize. I'm sorry." "Get out," Vincent said. Vanessa practically ran out of the boutique the moment Leo unlocked the door. Vincent turned and looked at Abigail. For a moment, the coldness in his eyes seemed to fracture, replaced by a strange, intense possessiveness. He didn't love her. He barely knew her. But she belonged to him now, and no one touched what belonged to the Don. "Finish the dress," Vincent snapped at the terrified seamstresses, "and make it fit perfectly. She is going to be the most powerful woman in this city by midnight." Abigail swallowed hard, staring at the monster who had just defended her. She was suddenly terrified, not of the rival Mafia families, but of the man she had just sold her soul to. Because as much as he claimed this was just business, the way he was looking at her right now was anything but clinical. That night, as Abigail was leaving the hospital after her final shift, she walked toward her beat-up Honda Civic in the dark parking garage. A shadow detached itself from the concrete pillar beside her car. "Mrs. Costanza to be," a gravelly, unfamiliar voice said from the darkness. Abigail froze, her hand gripping her keys like a weapon. A man stepped forward, the dim fluorescent light catching the gleam of a jagged scar across his cheek and the undeniable shape of a suppressed pistol in his hand. "It's a shame," the man smiled, raising the weapon. "The wedding is cancelled." The parking garage under Massachusetts General Hospital was a cavern of damp concrete and flickering fluorescent lights. Abigail stared at the suppressed pistol leveled at her chest, her mind instantly shifting from exhausted nurse to primal survival mode. The man's scarred face twisted into a cruel grin. He was a Russian contractor, hired by the rival Moretti syndicate to sever the Costanza bloodline before the trust could be unlocked. "Nothing personal, sweetheart," the hitman whispered, his finger tightening on the trigger. Abigail didn't scream. Instead, fueled by years of wrangling violent, drug-addled patients in the ER, she threw her heavy plastic tote bag directly at his face. The bag, loaded with thick medical textbooks and a heavy steel thermos, struck the assassin squarely in the nose. The gun fired, the suppressed shot sounding like a violent cough. The bullet grazed Abigail's upper arm, slicing through her scrub top and tearing a fiery path across her flesh. She stumbled backward, her heavy frame hitting the concrete hard, knocking the wind from her lungs. Before the hitman could recover and aim again, the shadows behind him exploded. Vincent Costanza stepped out from behind a concrete pillar, an elegantly suppressed Sig Sauer in his hand. He didn't shout. He didn't hesitate. He fired 3 times in rapid succession. The assassin dropped to the floor, instantly dead, a pool of dark crimson spreading across the grey concrete. Vincent barely glanced at the corpse. He closed the distance between him and Abigail in 2 long strides, his expensive Brioni trousers soaking up the blood on the floor as he dropped to his knees beside her. For the first time since she had met the ice-cold Mafia boss, there was absolute, unfiltered panic in his eyes. "Abigail," Vincent demanded, his hands hovering over her bleeding arm. "Look at me. Look at me." "I'm fine," Abigail gasped, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. She didn't faint. She didn't cry. She sat up, her thick thighs planted firmly on the ground, and grabbed the sleeve of her ruined scrubs, ripping the fabric further to inspect the wound. "It's a through-and-through graze. Didn't hit the brachial artery. I need pressure." Vincent stared at her, utterly stunned. He had seen hardened mob enforcers weep from lesser wounds, yet this exhausted, overweight civilian woman was clinically diagnosing her own gunshot injury. Without a word, Vincent ripped the silk Tom Ford tie from his neck and wrapped it tightly around her fleshy bicep, pulling the knot taut. His hands were trembling. Hers were perfectly still. "You had me followed," Abigail stated, wincing slightly as the silk bit into her skin. "I protect what is mine," Vincent growled, his dark eyes scanning the perimeter of the garage. "The Moretti family knows about the wedding. They know about my grandfather's ultimatum. They sent him to make sure the trust remains locked. If you die, I lose the empire." "Well, you better tell your driver to pull the car around," Abigail said, using his shoulder to push her heavy body up from the floor. She winced, leaning her weight against his solid chest. "Because if I bleed to death on this pavement, your precious empire goes to the Vatican." A strange, complex emotion flashed across Vincent's face. It wasn't just possessiveness anymore. It was deep, profound respect. He wrapped his arm around her wide waist, supporting her weight effortlessly, pressing her softly curved body against his tailored suit. "Leo," Vincent spoke into his earpiece, "bring the armored Cadillac to the lower ramp. Now. We have a mess." An hour later, they were barricaded inside the penthouse of the Liberty Hotel, a luxury establishment built from the bones of the old Charles Street jail. The entire floor had been secured by Costanza soldiers. In the opulent marble bathroom, Abigail sat on the edge of the tub, aggressively cleaning her own wound with iodine from a first aid kit. Vincent stood in the doorway, a glass of amber scotch in his hand, watching her with intense fascination. She was not delicate. She was not small. Her stomach rolled softly over the waistband of her scrub pants, and her thighs were thick and bruised from the fall. Yet in the harsh bathroom lighting, surrounded by danger and death, Vincent realized she was the most magnificent creature he had ever laid eyes on. "My grandfather is dying tonight," Vincent said quietly, breaking the silence. Abigail stopped wrapping the gauze around her arm and looked up. The coldness in his voice was gone, replaced by a hollow, agonizing grief. "The hospital called while we were in the car," Vincent continued, taking a slow sip of his scotch. "His organs are shutting down. He has hours left. The lawyer is on his way here. We have to sign the marriage certificate tonight, Abigail. Right now." Abigail stood up, tossing the bloody medical supplies into the trash. The reality of the situation crashed down on her. The $2 million, her mother's safety, the Russian hitman in the garage. There was no turning back. "Bring me the papers," she said softly. The wedding ceremony took exactly 4 minutes. It was officiated by a terrified, highly compensated judge in the center of the hotel penthouse. There was no white dress, no flowers, no music. Abigail wore a borrowed silk robe that clung to her heavy curves, and Vincent wore a blood-stained dress shirt. But when Vincent slid the massive, flawless 5-carat Costanza family diamond onto Abigail's plump finger, his hand lingered. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, his dark eyes locking onto hers with a burning intensity that made her breath catch. "By the power vested in me by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, I pronounce you husband and wife," the judge stammered, quickly packing his briefcase. Before the judge could even leave the room, Leo Greco stepped into the penthouse, his massive frame tense. "Boss, we just got the call from Mass General Don Carmine is gone." The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Vincent closed his eyes, his jaw clenching so hard it looked like it might shatter. He had just lost the only man who had ever truly loved him. The estate lawyer, a nervous man in a grey suit, immediately opened a leather folder on the mahogany table. "Mr. Costanza, with the marriage executed prior to his passing, the terms of the Carmine Costanza Trust are fulfilled." The billions in legitimate assets, the real estate, the international holding companies, they are officially unlocked. You are the sole trustee. Leave, Vincent ordered the lawyer and the judge. They scrambled out of the room, leaving only Vincent, Abigail, and Leo. Vincent walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the glittering Boston skyline. He had won. The empire was secure. But as he looked at Abigail, sitting quietly on the velvet sofa, clutching the silk robe around her waist, he realized the truth. The transactional nature of this marriage had died the moment he saw her bleeding on the concrete. "There's something else, boss," Leo said, his gravelly voice hesitant. "Before Don Carmine passed, he gave me a letter. He said to read it to you only after the ring was on her finger." Vincent turned around, frowning. "Read it." Leo unfolded a piece of heavy parchment. "Vincenzo, if you are hearing this, the empire is yours. You think I chose the nurse to punish you. You think I am a crazy old man. But the Mafia never forgets a debt. 25 years ago, a rival crew cornered me outside Pizzeria Regina in the North End. They had me dead to rights. An innocent bystander, a young accountant, saw the ambush. He pushed me out of the way and took a bullet to the spine for me. He was crippled for life, leaving his wife and young daughter in crushing poverty. That man was Robert Higgins, Abigail's father. Abigail gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Her father hadn't abandoned them. He had been permanently disabled and hidden away by the mob to protect his family from retaliation. She had spent her entire life thinking he was a deadbeat, while her mother worked herself into an early grave. "I watched over them from the shadows," Leo continued reading. "I watched Abigail grow up. I watched her become strong, resilient, and fiercely loyal. She is not a fragile mob princess who will break when the feds knock on the door. She is a survivor. She is exactly the kind of queen the Costanza family needs to survive the next century. She is my final gift to you, Vincenzo. Protect her, love her, or I will haunt you from hell." Leo folded the letter and quietly exited the room, leaving them entirely alone. Tears streamed down Abigail's flushed cheeks. Her entire life, the poverty, the struggle, her mother's illness, the mountain of debt, had all been tethered to this violent, hidden world. She looked down at the massive diamond on her finger, sobbing openly. Vincent crossed the room and fell to his knees in front of her, the most feared man on the East Coast, kneeling before a woman the world had deemed undesirable. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out the prenuptial agreement that guaranteed their eventual divorce, and slowly, deliberately, ripped it in half. He tore the pieces again, tossing the shredded paper onto the carpet. "I told you I protect what is mine," Vincent whispered, reaching up to cup her soft, tear-stained face in his large, warm hands. "The Moretti family tried to take you from me tonight. Before the sun rises, I am going to burn their entire syndicate to the ground. Every casino, every port, every warehouse. I will paint the streets of Boston red for what they did to your arm." Abigail looked into his eyes. There was a terrifying, beautiful monster inside him, but for the first time, she realized the monster belonged entirely to her. "And when you are done?" Abigail asked, her voice trembling but surprisingly strong. "When I am done," Vincent promised, his gaze dropping to her lips, "I am coming home to my wife, and I am never letting you go." He kissed her, tasting the salt of her tears, sealing a bloody vow that the criminal underworld would whisper about for decades to come. If this shocking mobster romance kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button and share it with your fellow drama lovers. Want more thrilling stories filled with unexpected twists, dark secrets, and fierce heroines who break all the rules? Make sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Drop a comment below. Would you have signed the contract? See you in the next video.